that we made it and weren't killed. To me, that was a miracle.
If we were to define miracle, how do you think most people would define a miracle? What would their definition of a miracle be?
Supernatural.
Something supernatural?
Well, to me, that was a gift from God.
Gift from God?
Beyond what you would expect. In your normal thinking of
Beyond
reality.
normal stuff, yeah. And so when we talk about miracles, for the most part, we talk about those things that are supernatural, which are not ordinary, which seem to go outside of the regular course of nature as we know it. And so miraculous to us is always that stuff which can't happen any other way. In the Bible, it's not quite the same. The Bible's understanding of miracles would better be to see a miracle as a sign, not as a supernatural event. So in biblical times, there was so much about science that they didn't understand and about medicine that they didn't understand, that their normal way of thinking was not in scientific terms, wasn't in medical terms, just wasn't in that way. The biblical writers, I'm not saying we're dumb and weren't smart, but we didn't have any Einsteins in the group that were trying to write a scientific basis for how things happen. What they were doing was relating what they had seen or others had told them about what had happened. And they were always relating it to God. So in the scriptures, in biblical times, there are a couple of assumptions that we need to understand. Number one is all biblical writers believed in God. They were not objective in their writing. They were not writing objective histories or writing objective science or geography or anything of the sort. What they were trying to do was to convey a message about God. And the only way that we know anything about God is what He reveals to us. None of us can get into God's mind and figure out what's there. The only way we know about God is through His actions. What He has chosen to reveal to us and how He acts in the midst of us, in His people. The authors of the Bible wrote down, here's how God has acted. And the stories that they tell, the incidents that they relate, all have to do with something about who God is and what kind of God do we have. Does that make any sense? The purpose of the miracle stories is not to prove that God can do the supernatural. If you believe in God, you assume that as a fact. So the miracles are not to prove that Jesus could do supernatural things. The miracles are there to show that Jesus, in fact, is God, because only God has the power to do these things. And more than that, they show who this God is. A God who's compassionate, a God who's caring, a God who's loving. All right? So I kind of like to start there. The whole thing about miracles turned in the 1800s when people began to get more philosophical and more scientific in terms of their understanding of nature. You realize that in the Bible there is no word for nature. All right? So what we consider to be natural stuff is not a biblical concept. It is a scientific concept that has evolved over time. And so what we have is this science that we began to understand and say, this is the way in which the world works. And so miracles got defined as working outside of the natural way in which the world works. And then those who are into philosophy, Spinoza, Hume, were some of the early ones who began to attack, in terms of philosophers, began to attack the concept of miracles on the basis of what we know and can understand based upon our human knowledge. But here's my understanding. My understanding is that all philosophy and science is based upon human knowledge and is therefore limited by human knowledge. So it's all our best understanding, given all the experiments, research, all the knowledge that we have. And that, therefore, it's limited to what our knowledge is. And so, for the last couple hundred years, it's been very popular to attack the Bible and to say, on the basis of either philosophical understandings or scientific evidence, that these things probably didn't happen, or certainly didn't happen in the way that the Bible presents. Therefore, the assumption is that the miracles that point to God, or creation, whatever you want to say, that point to God, really aren't true, therefore God isn't true. Okay? So much of what goes on in our world, from atheists who attack religion on the basis of science or philosophy, come from the premise that God does not exist. If God does not exist, then these miracles of God could not have happened. And I'm going to prove to you that they didn't, to prove my basis that God doesn't exist. The Bible takes the opposite tact, I think. The Bible assumes God exists and takes the premise that these things indeed are miraculous because they point to God and who God is. Unfortunately, in the Christian church, we've taken up these attacks upon kind of the human knowledge and understanding of science and philosophy, and we've begun to counterattack using their terms. And I guess my notion is, and I might be completely wrong on this, my notion is that the Bible was never meant to be presented in those terms, and we're changing it then. And we lose the focus of what the Bible was trying to tell us. So I believe that miracles are those events, whether we can call them natural and explain them, or whether we call them supernatural because we cannot explain them. But whether they are natural or supernatural, they all point to an act of God or something that helps us in our understanding of God. Miracles always said something about God. If they didn't, they weren't considered to be a miracle. Miracles in the New Testament are also called signs and wonders. What's the other one? I want to say major works. That's not quite right. Mighty works of God. Okay? These are ways, all of which, every time there is a miracle, the point is not, could God have done the miracle? That is never the point. It's never the point of a healing. It's never the point of something over nature, casting out demons. The point is not, could God have done it? And when we get off the point and start to think that that's the whole point, we're missing the point. Am I making any sense? The point of these stories within our scriptures, whether it's creation, whether it's the Exodus and the Red Sea, whether it's water into wine, the point of those stories is not, is this true? The point is, what is it communicating to us about who God is and how God works? All right, is this new to you or is this old hat? Am I wasting my breath here?
Wasting your breath.
Wasting my breath, okay. All right. How do you see it?
I see it pretty much the way you just described it. You mentioned that human knowledge seems to be so much as the boundary, but that's always expanding as well. What cannot be explained in one time period might be explainable at another time period. And so it seems to me that miracles, pretty much the emphasis is in the wrong place. Can it be done or can it not be done through natural means, or does it have to be supernatural and so forth? I don't believe in the supernatural. I think it's only natural. I think God works within all of what's possible in the universe, and there's so much that we've not experienced yet that currently seems to be natural to us. But it's interesting to realize that there are some of the miracles, some of the really hardcore miracles, like Jesus appearing in the upper room with the doors all bolted shut, resurrection,